Alright everyone, welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to talk about how we can insert the categories into the database. So if you see here, I have created a drop down where all the categories will be listed. We also have a input field for title and also for description. And on the right hand side, we have an option to upload the image. So let's get started with that. The first thing that we need to make sure is that our form is pointing to our categories.store route, and it also has the anchor type set to multi-part / form data. If we do not set this, so we will not be able to upload the files into our server. All right. So with that said, let's get started. The first thing is basically we have created the controller here on which is basically the category controller. Now let's create a couple of rules here. So make sure that the authorize is set to true. And then the first thing I need to check is this category ID. Okay. So we can check the category ID um, that it is nullable. Okay, it should be integer and it should exist within categories ID. Next, we have title. So title is basically required. It should be string, a maximum of 255 characters. That's not necessary. We can remove that, and we can also remove the uniqueness as well. Lastly, we need description. So for the description is basically nullable and string as well. And one more thing is basically we need to use the image. So for our image, we basically need to have the image is nullable. We need to set the type is image. It should accept JPEG or PNG images. And the maximum could be like 2048 characters. Okay. Sorry, 2048 KB, which is basically a maximum of 2 MB. So, with that said, let's get started. We can also allow the WebP images as well. Now let's try to insert the data into the database. The first thing that we need to do is basically we need to use the try catch block. We need to catch the exception and query exception. If that fails, so let's go into our try section and we use database transactions. And we also have created or imported this service. So in this service, let's also use let's create a store function. This accepts the request. Now since we have a category model here, so what we need is basically we need to return category create, and inside this category create we have the parent underscore id, which is request, and it should be um, input category id, the first thing. Secondly, we have title, and we should accept the title as title. Then we have our description section, and we also need to point to the description. Here, if you take a look, we have parent ID, title. We also have URL title as well. So for the URL title, definitely we are going to generate the URL title. So $this generate URL title. And here we are going to pass the request object. Let's create a function of protected function generate URL title. And here what we need is basically the similar thing that we have done in our register service. You can see the way we generated the username, the exactly same thing we need to do with our category service. But this time a slightly change would be integrated. So instead of last name and first name, we first need to have the title, and we need to make sure that the slug accepts the title, and we also need to import the slug class as well. Additionally, instead of user, we need to use the category and where URL underscore title, like and slug like so. So we also need to replace the variable names, and this also will return the string. Okay, so this is how we can generate the titles. The last thing is basically we need to import the images. Now, in order to import the images or upload the images, what I prefer is basically we should have a one generic function which basically does all the job for us. So for that thing, first of all, let's create a class, and it should be inside the services, and the name of the class is basically general service. Inside this general service, we are going to basically paste our code. So I will definitely copy and paste the code from another project, and I will explain you what that code is doing. So here is the code, which basically is a function which takes two parameters. The first is the path and the second is the file name. And here you can see that I have also declared the default path and default file name. The next line is basically in making sure that the path exists. If it does not exist, definitely this will create the directory for us. And we can definitely remove these other two options, the mod and recursive. So you can see that they are already basically the default values. So we can remove that. And then we are checking if this has a file. Then we are getting the file name with extension, we are getting the file name only, we are getting the extension, we are renaming our files, and then we are storing the file, basically defining the path of the file, and then we are returning the asset function. Okay, so this will definitely return us the full path of the file. This is how this will work. Now, in order to import it, what we need is basically we need to use the image, and we also need to use the import the class, so which is our general service, and let's also use the function of upload. So the path would be uploads forward slash categories. Okay, and the image would be the name of the image would be image by default. So let's come down to our section where we have an image option. So here inside of type file ID, and I am going to use the name would be image. All right, so with that said, if I now reload the page, the other thing that we also make sure is that by default all the images will go into our storage directory inside the app. Okay, which is definitely I do not want all the storage to be definitely all public files to be stored here. So what we need is basically we need to go into the .env system, and here we have the file system. Inside here you can see that we have a file system which is set to local. Okay, local basically. Now if you open the file system directory, the file system file inside our config, so here you can see the local is basically pointing to our this path. Now what I want is basically instead of local I want to use the public directory. Okay, so let's replace this local to public, and this public will basically create a folder of app forward slash public and then all the folders within that. If you don't want to just specify these folders, you can basically remove them, or else you can let them as it is. So what I'm going to do is basically I am going to remove these folders. Okay, so the default will be storage path and then our all the files. Now, if we try to go and reload our page and let's try to insert the record. So for the categories title, the first thing that I am going to do, if we take a look at our Udemy here, so we have a lot of categories. Let me see where we have those. So yeah, so inside the development, so let's create development category. All right, and for the testing purposes we can upload the image and see if it is working. Let's also import the dummy text or dummy description from lipsum.com and let's paste it here and now hit submit. The other thing which I notice is that um, we have not basically included our errors files which are required. So let me also grab those from our pages. So inside the create, above the form method, so right above the title where we have this one, so we also need to import the errors, and additionally we also need to import those here as well. And one last thing is that once the category is stored, we are not returning the user. So what we need is basically we need to return redirect user back with, and inside that we need to define the success method. Okay, else it fails. So we need to first of all log the error of exception. Then we also need to db rollback and return redirect back with error. And inside the error, we need to define the exact message of our error. And this also requires the redirect response. All right. Now, if I reload the page, let's take a look to see if our categories are stored or not. All right, so here we can see we have a development title, we have URL development. We also now have the image as well, and the description is also stored. If I now try to take a look at our image, so it says that the image is not found. Okay, so let's take a look at our folder inside our public uploads categories. Okay, so definitely this file didn't save into our directory. So let's see what exactly the issue could be. All right, so one thing I noticed is that this is pointing to storage path. It should be public path, not storage path. Okay, that is the reason. And if we take a look at our storage, so you can see we have uploads folder categories and the image is here. We don't want that. Instead of storage path, we can use the public path. Now let's try to create another category of, let's say, business. And let's also try to upload the same file, click submit, and our category has been uploaded or saved. Refresh the page, sorry, the database, and let's try to see if we are now able to get the image, and now you can see that the image is uploaded. All right, so we have learned how we can store the categories. In the next lecture, we are going to work on this parent drop down. Definitely, we can fetch all the categories from the categories table, but if you see, we have declared a parent ID here. So what I want is basically I want this thing to behave like a tree structure. So if there is any parent, this should come up top and then all its children's will should be populated below that category. I will discuss those in the next lecture. That's about it, and I will see you in the next one.